For all its liberal leanings and history as the first state to legalize gay marriage, Massachusetts remains divided when it comes to Michelle Kosilek. The 64-year-old transgender inmate was born Robert Kosilek and is serving a life sentence for the 1990 murder of his wife. For years, Kosilek has been fighting for gender reassignment surgery. The procedure is now in legal limbo as the state appeals a federal order to provide that surgery to Kosilek at taxpayer expense. In this week's Focus Report, we hear directly from Kosilek in a recorded telephone interview with Boston Spirit magazine, which the publication shared with WGBH News. Michelle Kosilek tells Spirit magazine he endured a childhood of torment and abuse.
I was beaten, locked in closets. At one point, sleeping in the closet overnight, was not fed. And not long afterwards, my grandfather began molesting me.
Kosilek says the struggle with sexual identity led to substance abuse and that he finally wound up in a treatment facility in 1983, where he met a volunteer named Cheryl McCall.
I trusted my therapist. He referred me to Cheryl, and Cheryl is the one who assisted me.
Kosilek married McCall and then killed her in May of 1990 when she came home to find him dressed in women's clothing. And so began the long prison journey to gender reassignment surgery.
When I was a prisoner in the Bristol County Jail trying to get this treatment, I had $27,000 in my prison account. I had all this money in my jail account. I was willing to pay for my own surgery. I had contacted a surgeon, and he had agreed to come here and do the surgery.
But it never happened. Kosilek, who changed his name from Robert to Michelle, has been embroiled in a series of lawsuits with the state over hormone treatment, electrolysis, and, of course, the surgery itself, which federal court judge Mark Wolf ruled the state must do because not doing so would amount to cruel and unusual punishment.
It's heartbeat to me. You don't lose your right to humanity and dignity when you go to prison. We don't go to prison for punishment. We come to prison as punishment. This is what a lot of people, even our elected officials, don't understand.
Kosilek, currently serving a life term at MCI Norfolk, says life has gotten much better over the years. But that wasn't always the case.
Faggot, freak, stuff like that from staff and from other prisoners. I was relatively isolated, as I have been for much of my incarceration. There were people who were in disagreement with the way that I looked, the way that I walked, the way that my voice sounded. I got disciplinary reports for using homemade makeup, and there was verbal abuse involved.
The abuse led to self-castration attempts. Still, Kosilek remains dismissive of the crime.
I came to prison for taking a life in a tragically accidental situation, and regardless of that, I am nonetheless a human being deserving of dignity, and that medical care is one of the things that prisons are required to provide.
That accidental situation was a gruesome murder, practically severing McCall's head with a wire, then driving her naked body to a nearby mall and leaving her there.
I have made a lot of mistakes, and I probably will continue to make mistakes, though none of them will be as damaging to others, I'm sure, as those I've made in the past, where I was running from myself because others were willing to beat me to convince me that I should be myself. But I'm not a bad person, regardless of how this DOT might try to instigate immediate into conflating the crime with my status as a transgender woman.
The Massachusetts DOC is now appealing a federal court ruling that upheld Kosilek's right to gender reassignment surgery. My guest tonight jointly conducted the interview with Michelle Kosilek. David Zimmerman is publisher of Boston Spirit magazine, which he launched in April 2004. He previously worked at the Boston Business Journal and Boston Magazine. And James Lapata is editor of Boston Spirit and former editor of the now-defunct LGBT publication in Newsweekly. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So I'm curious, David, first of all, how this came about. Did Kosilek contact you? Did you contact him? How did it work?
We got in touch with her. Jim and I had talked about doing this story for a while, and in November, I wrote her a letter at MCI Norfolk, gave her a copy of the magazine along with the letter, mentioned that she's a member of the LGBT community. We're the publication for the LGBT community, and the community wants to hear from her. So we'd always heard from spokespeople and lawyers and activists, but we had not heard from her. And that the community really would like to hear from her, and she responded and said she would talk to us.
James, the interview, I listened to the whole thing. That's just portions of it. I mean, both of you seem sympathetic to Michelle Kosilek's cause. Are you?
She's an unsympathetic character, clearly. I think that the issue around this case is, there's a couple of them. One is around the transgender issue. Medical care is required by the state for prisoners. If she needed a hip replacement, she would get it. If she needed cancer treatment, she would get it. Why is this transgender issue different? So I do have to say that I do have some sympathy in this case. That's this medically required surgery that doctors have said is required. The prison is required to give that treatment to prisoners, and I'm not sure why they're not.
There's a lot of layers to this. As
yes,
you both this is really complicated. I mean, that's one version, and that's certainly Michelle Kosilek's version, and Judge Wolf has ruled on that. But
yes.
We were just reading this self-published biography, autobiography that Michelle Kosilek produced in 2012. I mean, it's disturbing on many. Starts out by saying that she is married to another transgender woman who's at another prison, so that would make both, two women. I mean, that's a confusing issue. Refers to herself as a little girl throughout this dialogue, as a little girl. So it's this. There are a lot of psychological and by the way, this person has had a lot of criminal activity. It wasn't just the murder of Cheryl McCall, but had been involved in criminal activity most of his life, really. So, I mean, it's not just, there's psychological, they say that transgender identity isn't a psychological disorder, yet there's no question that there's psychological issues here.
There are. In our focus in our article was really on Michelle's battle with the state and the transgender issue as an LGBT magazine. So when we took that into account, that's really what it came down to. Gender identity disorder is a medical disorder. It's not a psychological disorder. It's been categorized as medical disorder, and the treatment for that medical disorder is gender reassignment surgery. And as Jim said, as a prisoner, prisoners are to get housing, shelter, food, and adequate medical care. And as this went through the legal system, experts came in, testified over and over again, and said that the adequate medical care in for this disorder is transgender reassignment surgery. And every time an expert came in and said that, the Department of Corrections fired that person or ignored their advice 5 times.
Or they're definitely fighting it because they're looking at some of these other issues, like marrying another woman, and they're saying, maybe there's more to this. Maybe Michelle Kosilek is gaming the system, and we want to really get to the bottom of this, because it was that simple. I think they would have gone ahead with it, because this is not precedent-setting. Other prisoners have had gender reassignment.
Right, and one of the big problems, one of the big issues that the Department of Corrections has had hasn't necessarily been the surgery, it's been the post-surgery care, and what are they going to do after the surgery, and how are they going to care for her after the surgery. And that's been a big issue that's gone on throughout the course of the case.
And then does Michelle Kosilek get transferred to Framingham State Prison, which Judge Wolf also recommended?
Right, exactly.
Go ahead, James, you were going to say something.
No, I was going to say, I mean, there are a number of issues here. I mean, one of them is the fact that our prisons are filled with people who have mental health and behavioral histories, and, the question is, would Michelle Kosilek have needed this surgery before she went into prison? And the answer is yes. I mean, the standard procedure would be that gender reassignment surgery should have happened before. With the other behavioral health issues, if these had been taken care of, would she be in this position now? And it's a question for the larger society in terms of the problem with our prison system. So that's another layer of...
Yeah, but the state wouldn't have paid for it then, and so it wouldn't have been the issue. And there's also this thing that there was a decision made on her part that she needed this the same day she killed her wife. So there's... And do you think that's true, by the way, that the media conflates the crime with her status as a transgender?
I'm not sure it's the media that does it, but I do think the public does.
Yeah.
So in other words, Jim said, well, what if this was a convicted murderer who needed hip replacement surgery? It would not be a story. I think the public at large has a little bit of a hard time wrapping their head around the gender issue and the gender reassignment issue. It's not cosmetic surgery. I've read many comments that said it's cosmetic surgery.
Oh, no.
It's not. It's the accepted medical procedure for someone who has this disorder. So it is it is similar to other situations where prisoners get medical care.
All right, David Zimmerman and James Lapata, fascinating. interview.